for questions. And just for everybody's awareness, we're recording Lori's content and kind of just like breaking things down, but we're going to pause recording when we get to Q&A, so folks can feel free to plug in and ask whatever questions you have. So thanks for joining again. I'm Morgan Harper. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at American Economic Liberties Project. We are a nonpartisan research and advocacy organization that's focused on addressing corporate concentration across the economy and economic policy more broadly, and trade is a core component of that. And luckily, we have a whole Rethink Trade program, and our director of that, Lori Wallach, who is on top of this issue. And actually, I'm going to turn over to her to give the latest, but just want to make sure everybody knows we are here to be a resource on all things competition and economic policy. So please do be in touch on this issue and any other that's coming up that we can support on. So with that, Lori, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who's joining us. A bunch of people have emailed or called, and I thought it might be a good use of time to just make an opportunity to walk folks through this, particularly folks who aren't in the trade world, of what happened, and just sort of, your free trade attorney on call to answer any questions. So just, the basics. On February 1st, the president issued 3 executive orders. The executive orders were to impose tariffs as of midnight last night on Mexico, Canada, and China. They had specific tariff rates, 25% for Mexico and Canada, except for energy from Canada, 10% on China. That's 10% on top of the existing tariffs, of which the average is just under 20%, and it covers 2/3 of all of the imports China sends us. Plus, there's some items like EV batteries and solar that President Biden, who maintained the 2018 Trump first administration China tariffs, added 100% tariffs on some other stuff from China. This 10% is on top of those. So for everyone who's asked the question, why are we having lower tariffs on the country we're most worried about as compared to our neighbors? We're not. That was a top up. But the 10% now is like the first time there've been any tariffs on certain things that had been excluded previously, like iPhones. These executive orders covered everything. All products from those 3 countries with no exclusions, and no exclusion process also to set up to get out from under those tariffs. The ostensible reason for the tariffs was related to fentanyl and migration. In the trade law world, there was a bunch of speculation about why those things were the feature. Was it because the authority that this executive order used was IEEPA? It's a statute that's been around for dozens of years that basically gives a president wide discretion to people are having audio problems. At least one person is. Hopefully you can hear me. It is.
I'm hearing you okay, Lori. So yeah, Max, let us know if that doesn't get resolved, but go ahead.
Okay. It is a statute that basically allows a president to have discretion in an economic emergency. And it is, for instance, something under which sanctions often get used, imposed in an outbreak of war, et cetera. It's been used in the past for tariffs. The last time they were totally across the board tariffs, Nixon in 1971, but it's not typical. But it is one of those foreign policy discretion of the president statutes. It's speedy. Just to keep in mind, members of Congress have constitutional exclusive authority over tariffs. The U.S. Constitution, Article 1(8), gives Congress exclusive authority both on tariffs and regulating commerce foreign nations. They're 2 separate Article 1(8) clauses of Congress's trade authority. So the executive order requires some citation to an authority under which Congress has delegated authority to impose a tariff. A president can't just magic wand, I'm raising tariffs. So there are a variety of statutes. IEEPA is the one that probably is the fastest and has the most broad discretion. There are other ones you hear about. You'll hear about Section 301. That was that refers to a Section 301 of Trade Act. That is the authority under which the China tariffs in Trump's first term were imposed. Sometimes you hear Section 201, 232. Those are all different statutes that give the authority to a president to impose tariffs, typically on the basis of a finding. So you have to do a Section 301 report. You have to show certain things. There are different statutory requirements. it's about subsidies, or it's about dumping, or it's about a surge. It's about balance of payments. They each have different reasons the president has authority. This is under IEPA. So a lot of people thought the reference to fentanyl and migration was to trigger IEPA, which requires a finding under the National Emergencies Act of a national emergency. The executive orders, if you look at them, do that, check that box to be able to get to this authority. That's just a little bit of background of sort of what happened on paper. Ostensibly, last night at midnight, these tariffs should have gone into effect, except the president had discussions with both Mexico and Canada eventually, and with respect to both of those two countries, the imposition of the tariffs was suspended for 1 month. Now, there's another feature that was in there that's very important. In each of the executive orders, they all had this clause: for avoidance of doubt, duty-free de minimis treatments under 19 U.S.C. 1321 shall not be available for the articles described in subsection A and subsection B of this section. A and B basically boil down to everything. So A and B are the list of goods, and it's all the products. So what that basically was saying, and was in effect for all three countries, was not only are these new tariffs going into effect, but you can't sneak around paying the tariffs by using de minimis. That is the exception you've probably heard more and more about, that allows any day for any U.S. citizen to resident to get up to $800 in goods shipped to them duty-free, tax-free, and unfortunately entered through what's called informal entry, which is a not very detailed set of customs information and typically no inspection. So we've had a flood of e-commerce products coming in now, 4 million a day. This is the real fentanyl issue, is this flood of products under which are hidden illicit things like fentanyl laced pills that just don't get inspected and end up at someone's doorstep. So this de minimis exception was just for the duty-free treatment of de minimis. So part of de minimis is you have to pay a tariff. You basically, even if it were subject to a tariff, you get away with not paying the tariff, including these penalty tariffs. So that was shutting the door to not paying the new tariffs. But the executive order didn't deal with the second part, which is to make sure that the customs procedures have to be followed. There are two kinds of basic ways things come into the country. Formal entry is what you think of when you think of like a containerized ship coming in, and they're great big containers, and customs has to know 2 days in advance everything that's in there. It has to be filed online. It has to have the tariff code. And then different agencies basically all have risk assessment. So they put all of the tariff codes that they are worried about. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission is looking for flammable pajamas. And the Food and Drug Administration is trying to make sure no medicines come in unless they have an import license because they're actually kosher. And Customs is looking for, forced labor, cotton from China, and or for banned things that you're not, endangered species, other stuff. Every agency has different stuff. The crates get pulled off the ship, they get inspected. Unlike informal entry, where stuff just comes in without even the tariff code, you sort of write what you want to attest is in the box, true or not. You don't have to fill out the normal forms, and stuff doesn't get inspected. So if you don't do basically the end of informal entry for all of that stuff, you still pay the tariff. But for all that like fast fashion stuff, that's the 4 million packages a day, you'd still be bearing the fentanyl under that flood. For that stuff, the real issue is not the tariff, it's the actual customs formalities, the inspection. There was a letter sent to President Trump by a bunch of law enforcement groups, families of people who've lost loved ones to fentanyl, saying the key thing here is close the entire de minimis loophole, make everything come in with formal entry, which means it would get containerized again. Like you could still get a cheap t-shirt. It's just it would come in with 10,000 t-shirts in a container, and then your order would be filled from a warehouse someplace in the US after the stuff got inspected. So a couple of other things to know. Number one, since it became clear that the formal entry thing was not fixed, there has been a Federal Register notice that popped up On the upside, the Federal Register notice says that with regard to regardless of any of their value, no mail shipments from China will be cleared or released by CBP unless and until formal entry is properly filed. So that's great, except it appears to only actually cover the stuff that comes in by mail, which relative to all of the huge flood of de minimis packages, most of it comes in by air cargo. So unfortunately, that particular fix is not the full fix we need, though it seems to be barking up the right tree of the need to do something about the customs stuff, not just the tariff stuff. As well, there was a Customs and Border Protection notice out to the trade community that sends conflicting information. It sort of seems to suggest, yes, you have to pay the tariffs, but you can still come in informal or formal, depending on what. And the what in the background is the value. So stuff that's typically $200 and $2,500 or less can be informal, except if you're trying to stop a fentanyl flood that's coming in through this way, you stop doing that from, say, China, because you know that's been a big source of fentanyl. So what has happened is now we have these Federal Register kind of conflicting, theoretically formal, final one goes in tomorrow. We don't know if the de minimis thing will or will not pertain. But what did happen, Mexico and Canada suspended. That includes the de minimis stuff. So Mexico and Canada, it's status quo. No de minimis, closing of the loophole. But with China, the tariffs did, and I'm going to stop after saying this, the tariffs went into effect last night at midnight. And some of the things that are normally sneaky ways to cheat around it were not included in this executive order. So the tariffs really will kick in. And with respect to de minimis, the duty-free entry shut down last night at midnight. There was a lot of question, which we will know more of, I guess, tomorrow when we see what ends up as the final thing in the Federal Register, if they really did fix the part of it that's most important for fentanyl, which is to get the volume down of all the cheap packages by making it go to formal entry. Just as a footnote, the reason that's important is if you have formal entry, you have to have a customs broker who's someone licensed in the US, so someone's in charge. You can go back and try and get someone to be responsible to sue someone. They have to have a license, they have an address in the US, etc. There is a bond, which is like a kind of like an insurance thing that you're going to pay your tariffs, that you're not cheating. There are certain fees you have to pay. So if you have a $3 t-shirt, it doesn't make economic sense if for every 3 of those you put in a bag, you'd have to pay those other expenses. That's why you put that stuff in a great big container, put in a ship, and then have fulfillment in from a warehouse in the US. The good part of that is you're not going to have 4 million bags of stuff every day hiding the 10 really dangerous bags of stuff in the tsunami of packages. That is the reason why for fentanyl it's so important to get the volume down. And that is why that was the demand to President Trump by the various fentanyl family and law enforcement folks. So the only, I guess, final thing I would say is today, when there's been pushback about, wait a minute, why did you do tariffs? Like, where's the rest of the plan? If we're reindustrializing, why'd you get rid of the tariffs? If these are about economics, why aren't we just focusing on China mainly? Like, if it's about Mexico and Canada, why don't we just renegotiate the USMCA? That would be seen to be the way to fix trade problems with those countries. Like, administration, what is the meaning of all of this? And the answer back has been, this is not trade war stuff. This is drug war stuff. This has nothing to do with trade. These are the use of tariffs to try and negotiate on other things. And I have views about that, but I will leave those aside for a second and simply say, continuing to be confusing is that actually President Trump, in an impromptu Oval Office news conference over the weekend, said that part of what was necessary to get the tariffs to be waived was to get trade in balance with the countries in question. And then yesterday, in announcing the China waiver, said we have a month to make a new economic deal with Canada with the waiver. We have a month to make a new economic deal with Canada. So it's very confusing what this is about. I will say there is a written down plan from January 20th, the America First Trade Plan, that actually is a rational plan of who's supposed to do what over time to use those different statutory authorities. And this whole set of tariffs seems entirely unrelated. It literally isn't in the plan, but it also just in some ways contradicts what otherwise is sort of a plan about focusing more on trade balance and reindustrializing. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I've unpacked a bunch of stuff that was confusing, because a lot of the lingo that's used, like informal entry, etc., can be super confusing. Or did they close de minimis? Did they not? Not quite, but maybe they're trying to. It's unclear. I just wanted to give the overview, and then happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Lori. And yeah, folks should feel free to put a hand up, come off mute directly. We want,